James Eads is a name many St. Louis area residents are familiar with. He designed and constructed the Eads Bridge, which has been spanning the Mississippi River here since 1874. But Eads apparently had skills other than boat building, or at least the ability to convince people that he knew what he was doing, and then the talent for rallying the resources to make it happen. As a result, during the Civil War, Union forces were able to drive down the Mississippi River to divide the Confederacy in two.
So like any war, the Civil War in Missouri requires a war machine. These high levels of production. Women are making bullets, and James B. Eads in Carondelet, south of St. Louis, is making gunboats. The majority of the gunboats that operate on the Mississippi during the war are made right here in this area by James B. Eads, and these are some of them. So the kind of central nature of these gunboats can't be overstated. They allowed Union forces to drive down the Mississippi to divide the Confederacy into two parts. So James B. Eads' role can't be overstated.
He was a self-taught engineer, and he got into the business. He worked in salvage, shipwreck salvage, created a submersible that allowed people to stay underwater for periods of time. Everybody knows him for building the Eads Bridge, but he was also very instrumental in river works. And when the hostilities broke out at the beginning of the Civil War, he approached the government and ultimately contracted to make a series of gunboats and also martyr boats, and some of these turreted, what you think of more as a modern naval craft. He had two boat yards. He had boat yards here in St. Louis, right at the foot of Marseille Street, and down at Mound City, Illinois. They had skids. They would build the boats, on dry land, and had wooden skids. They would grease them and drop them in, and once the hulls were completed, they did it much of the superstructure when the boat was actually floating. His vessels were instrumental in Grant's campaign in the Mississippi River Valley, and one of the reasons that it was a success.
The Carondelet Historical Society is in the DePere School, which is the site of the first public-funded, continuously operated kindergarten system. This area was very much about being cut off from New Orleans, their port of entry and their port of exit for a lot of the materials and things that, plus people that immigrated in through New Orleans at that time. So Eads, along with his connection with the Bates and the Blair family, who were tied to the Lincoln's cabinet, sat down with the business people in St. Louis and decided that they would come up with a proposal for a Navy fleet to keep the river open. He was able to get an audience with Lincoln and Lincoln's cabinet. Eads himself had great knowledge of the river, self-taught civil engineer, and by all standards, probably one of the biggest entrepreneurs in the area at that time. He was a very good promoter of things, and he was very good at following through on details. Now, this was a man that didn't have anyone working for him at that time, didn't have any factory facilities, didn't have any agreements with anyone else, but he got the contract. But Eads, I think, demonstrated his capabilities, and this was late July, and by November he had to deliver these gunboats. Now that was to pull all the timber together to build it, pull all the manpower together to build them, physical building of the ships, get them in the water and down to Mound City, Illinois, or Cairo in that area by November. And to me, personally, that's the amazing part of the whole saga with James Eads, was how they maneuvered through the government contract business and be able to procure all the equipment and material in such a relatively short period of time. You're talking in terms 3 to 4 months, and deliver the product. City-class gunboats, like I said, there were 7 of them that were built, 4 of them here in Cronolette and 3 down at Mound City, Illinois. And they had a superb war record. The construction of them, like I said, was all wood. You had a paddle wheel in the back of the boat. They had added the quarters for the captain back there, and then along the side of the paddle wheel there was some officers' quarters and area for the medic, or the doctor that was on the boat there. They had 2 engines that propelled the paddle wheel on each side, and then they had a backup engine in the middle. The lower level of the boat was the areas where they had the furnaces and the boilers, along with the coal and wood that they built, that they burnt in the propulsion of the boat. And along the sides, they had the powder rooms and storage where they had lead-lined rooms to keep the powder safe in bags of black powder. Then when you got to the gun deck, that was kind of the service deck for everything. They had 13 cannons on there. They had 42-pounders, 32-pounders, and a smaller rifle, 2 smaller rifled cannons on the back end of the boat. So they had quite a bit of firepower. They fought from, once they left the St. Louis area, they were in enemy territory. So they spent a lot of times inside because Confederate sharpshooters would lay on the bank trying to pick off a pilot or 2 or anyone that was on deck. It was very hard. I think they lost more people to sickness than they did to actually combat. One thing that they found out right away when they got them into service was that the pilots were very vulnerable. So they iron-plated in the pilot houses, which is shown on this one here, and which was another unique feature, is that the Navy supplied the officers for the gunboats, but they could not get enough enlisted men. So they made up the crew of the Army of the Potomac, that they drafted soldiers that they put on, plus volunteers. And they also had, from the Cronolette, which I've done a lot of work on the gunboat itself, from the beginning, the muster rolls that I have, from the beginning to the 1865, that the manpower on the gunboats that were anywhere from 17 to 24% were African American or black sailors. The Navy had black sailors at that time, but the gunboats had quite a few, and they have them listed as either free men or contraband, which they referred to as slaves. Maneuverability of some of the gunboats really put them at a disadvantage, not being able to maneuver and get their guns into position. And that kind of led into another phase when we get into the monitor type gunboats, where they went with the turreted monitor, where that could turn 180 degrees or even 360 degrees if they wanted to turn it all around, which gave them more maneuverability. They did serve their purpose as far as fighting other Confederate gunboats of the same type on the river, and there were more naval encounters on the Mississippi River than anywhere else in the whole Civil War. The number of battles, the big ones, the Cronolette and the Arkansas fought. From the time they started out, just getting the hulls and everything down to Cape Girardeau to Mound City was a feat in itself. That at least kept that open, because that was considered enemy territory when you got down there. Then they fought and took 2 forts, Fort Donelson and Fort Henry, in February. And the idea of the Confederacy was to build a ring of forts that went down the Ohio River, down the Mississippi, all the way to New Orleans, and of course with Texas and Arkansas kind of falling into the Confederacy and part of Missouri, they kind of controlled both sides of the river. And they had built a number of forts and a number of emplacements along the river. The first would be down around New Madrid, Bird's Point, the island number 10, they referred to it. And the Confederacy was sure that they would stop anybody coming through there. Well, Walk took the Cronolette through one night during a storm, got on behind them and shelled them, and then the Pittsburgh followed and a couple of the other ones. So that broke their back right there at Missouri-Tennessee area. And they just fought every step of the way down the river. Down to Memphis was the largest fleet action during the Civil War of both navies at Memphis. So they broke the back on these forts eventually they got to Vicksburg, which was the Gibraltar of the Confederacy. It controlled the river. If you came up from New Orleans with the deep water sailors, or if you came down, you had to get by Vicksburg. And Vicksburg, if you've ever been there, it sits up on a very steep hill and bluff. And they had a command of the river. The river kind of meanders through there, so it was difficult to, get through that area without suffering a lot of casualties. That was at the same time that you get Eads, that you get Grant and Sherman involved with the siege of Vicksburg. I ran across an ad in a newspaper in the St. Louis Daily Democrat that he was advertising for ship's carpenters, and he was offering $2 for a 10-hour day with 25 cents for overtime, 25 cents per hour overtime. And if you kind of equate that out to what a government contract worker would make these days, the $89,000 per gunboat right now would seem like in the millions. So there were quite a lucrative contracts when you figure based on the hourly rate that they were paying workers. Along with that, when he opened the Union Iron Works, the gunboats that he were building there, the Monitor class gunboats, were running upwards of $560,000.
Ron Bolte says Eads got the government contract over established boat builders in Jeffersonville, Indiana, Pittsburgh, and Cincinnati. And they were disgruntled over the fact that Eads didn't have any practical background in boat building. Still, that didn't stop Eads.